All right, welcome back, everyone, for another deep dive.
Yeah.
And this time we're tackling a concept that really gets to the heart of how AI might change the way we think about work.
Hmm.
The productivity dividend.
Okay.
Now, we've got two sources we're going to be pulling from today.
All right.
Excerpts from this fascinating piece called Pasted Text,
Okay.
and a paper that really gets into the nitty-gritty called Productivity Dividend, Challenges and Solutions. So the big question we're going to be trying to answer today,
Yeah.
is this productivity dividend idea something that could actually work?
Right.
You know, is it just a pie-in-the-sky concept, or could it be a real solution to the challenges of AI and automation? But before we get ahead of ourselves, maybe let's start with the basics.
Yeah.
What exactly is this productivity dividend thing anyway?
Well, it's sort of a radical idea.
Okay.
It's like flipping the script on how we usually think about job loss because of automation.
Okay.
So instead of people just losing their jobs to AI, they actually become stakeholders in the system that's replacing them.
So it's not just about being laid off.
Exactly.
It's about getting a piece of the action.
Right.
Okay, but how does that actually work in practice?
All right. Well, the source gives a pretty interesting example.
Okay.
Let's say you've got a customer service rep and their job gets automated to, replaced by like a really advanced chatbot.
Right.
So under this productivity dividend model, they wouldn't just be out of work.
Okay.
They would actually start receiving a percentage of the extra revenue that chatbot brings in.
So it's like a safety net,
Kinda.
but it's tied directly to how well the AI is doing.
Exactly.
That's a really interesting concept.
Yeah.
But I gotta ask, how do we make sure those gains are being measured fairly?
That's a huge question.
And what's to stop people from just taking the money and not doing anything, just kind of checking out?
Yeah, you're really getting to the heart of the challenges here.
Right.
Like, this is a whole new way of thinking about work.
Right.
It's not going to be easy.
Okay, so let's start with that first challenge. How do you measure the AI's contribution?
Well, the paper actually talks about using really robust, transparent metrics.
Oh, okay.
And they even suggest potentially using blockchain technology.
Oh, wow. Blockchain.
Yeah, because blockchain creates this like permanent record.
Right, an immutable record.
Exactly. So you can track everything, make sure it's fair.
So it's about transparency and verifiability.
Exactly.
Okay, that makes sense. But what about that second challenge? People just disengaging.
Well, that's where this idea of incentivized engagement comes in.
Okay, incentivized engagement?
Yeah. So it's not just about passively getting these dividends.
Right.
There would be ways to encourage people to stay involved.
Like what?
Well, they could get bonuses for retraining.
Okay.
Or opportunities to help manage the AI systems, even brainstorm new ideas.
So it's not just a handout.
No.
It's about staying engaged and contributing.
Yeah, it's like investing in personal growth in this new world of work.
That's a really interesting way to put it.
Yeah.
But let's be real for a second.
Yeah.
This all sounds great in theory.
For sure.
But what are the actual benefits, if we could actually pull this off?
Well, one of the biggest potential benefits is addressing wealth inequality.
Oh, okay. So how does that work?
By sharing those AI gains directly, we make sure the people who help build the company aren't left behind.
That's a really important point.
Yeah.
Because we always hear about AI making that gap even worse.
Right.
But this seems like a way to actually counter that.
Exactly.
Okay, so that's one big benefit. What else?
Another big one is preserving consumer demand.
Okay, explain that one.
Because if people are losing their jobs left and right, they can't buy as much.
Right, their purchasing power goes down.
Exactly, and that hurts the whole economy. But if those folks are still getting income through these dividends, they can keep spending.
So it's like a buffer for the economy.
Yeah, you could think of it that way.
That's fascinating. Are there any social or psychological benefit?
Oh, absolutely.
Like what?
Well, by giving workers a stake in AI success, you might actually reduce some of that resistance to automation.
Interesting.
Yeah, it creates more of a collaborative feeling.
Right, instead of us versus them.
Exactly.
It's like we're all in this together.
Yeah, and that could make a big difference.
That's a really good point.
Mm-hmm.
But I have to imagine this isn't all sunshine and rainbows.
Of course not.
What are some of the pushbacks you've come across?
Well, one of the biggest criticisms is just how complex this would be to implement.
Right, we've already talked about measuring those gains accurately.
Exactly, and that's crucial for fairness.
Yeah, for sure.
And then there's the whole question of whether this is sustainable in the long run.
Okay, what do you mean by that?
Well, as AI gets even more powerful and automates even more jobs, what happens then?
Right, does the system break down?
Yes, the worry.
These are all really valid concerns.
Yeah.
But before we get too bogged down in the challenges,
Yeah.
let's shift gears and explore some potential solutions, because every big idea starts with some healthy skepticism.
For sure.
So where do we go from here?
Well, that's where things get really interesting.
Okay, I'm intrigued.
Our second source, the paper on challenges and solutions, dives into some pretty compelling ideas.
Okay, let's hear it.
It acknowledges that the productivity dividend by itself might not be enough.
Especially as AI keeps getting more advanced.
Exactly. So they propose looking at a bunch of other capitalist-oriented UBI models, almost like puzzle pieces to fit together.
So we're talking UBI, but not just like a standard everyone gets a check kind of UBI.
Right. These are more nuanced approaches designed for an AI-driven economy.
Okay, give me an example.
Well, one idea is public resource dividends.
Public resource dividends.
Yeah, so think about the profits we make from things like natural resources or intellectual property,
Okay.
instead of those going just to companies or governments.
Right.
Some of that can be used to provide a basic income for everyone.
So it's kind of like acknowledging that we all deserve a share of the wealth generated from those resources.
Exactly. It's a different way of thinking about it.
That's really interesting. What else?
Then there's automation royalties.
Automation royalties. Okay.
I imagine companies having to pay a kind of tax
Mm-hmm.
based on how much their automation efforts boost their productivity.
Okay.
And then those royalties go towards funding a basic income for everyone.
So it's like automation should benefit society, not just the companies doing it.
Exactly.
But wouldn't that discourage companies from automating?
It's a valid concern.
Right.
It's all about finding that balance.
Right. Incentivize progress, but also make sure everyone benefits.
Exactly. Remember, these are just frameworks.
Mm.
The details would need a lot of careful thought.
Yeah, to avoid any unintended consequences.
For sure.
So what other models did they talk about?
One that I thought was really cool is innovation bonds.
Innovation bonds. Okay.
So it's about treating UBI as an investment in the future.
Oh.
Governments could issue bonds that are specifically tied to the gains we expect from technology.
Interesting.
And as those innovations boost the economy,
Mm-hmm.
the returns on those bonds would fund the basic income.
So it's like betting on human ingenuity.
Yeah, and everyone gets to share in the winnings.
That's pretty optimistic.
It is. It reframes UBI as something positive.
Right. An investment, not a handout.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But, of course, it assumes that innovation will keep driving growth.
Right. And there's no guarantee of that.
No. But I like the idea of linking social well-being to our ability to innovate.
It feels proactive,
Yeah.
not just reacting to job losses.
Exactly.
But what about the practical side of things? How would you actually distribute this basic income?
That's a big question.
Right. Would it be cash, or are there other options?
Well, the paper talks about alternatives to just handing out cash.
Like what?
One idea is market-driven vouchers.
Okay, market-driven vouchers.
Yeah, so instead of cash, UBI could be given out as vouchers,
Okay.
which people can then use for specific goods and services.
So it's targeted spending.
Right, it could stimulate growth in certain sectors like education or healthcare.
And still give people what they need.
Exactly.
So it's getting more and more specific, moving away from that one-size-fits-all approach.
Right.
Are there any models that go even further?
There's one that's really out there. It's called shared equity in AI
Well,
enterprises.
shared equity, okay.
Yeah, so instead of just dividends, people would actually get ownership in the AI systems that replace them.
Whoa, that's a big one.
Yeah, it's about sharing ownership in the means of production.
But how would that even work?
Well, that's where the details get tricky, and the paper doesn't really get into specifics.
Right.
It's more about showing us the possibilities.
So thinking outside the box.
Exactly.
Mm,
We need
yeah.
to challenge our assumptions about work and ownership.
Yeah, because the landscape is changing so fast.
It is.
Okay, so we've got all these different UBI models,
Mm-hmm.
but we started with the productivity dividend.
Right.
So where does that fit in?
I see it as a potential first step, a way to address those immediate job losses while we figure out these bigger long-term solutions.
So bridge to the future.
You could say that.
That makes sense.
Yeah, the productivity dividend focuses on individual jobs, while these other models look at the whole society.
So it's like a two-pronged approach.
Yeah, tackling the immediate impacts and the bigger picture.
That's a really helpful way to think about it.
Good.
It feels like we're on the verge of some massive changes.
Definitely.
And how we approach these questions now will have a huge impact.
No doubt.
But it's easy to get lost in the abstract.
Mm-hmm.
So let's bring it back down to earth for a second.
Okay.
What does all this mean for our listeners?
Right.
If someone's listening to this maybe feeling a little anxious about their own job,
Yeah.
what would you say to them?
I'd say the future isn't set in stone.
Okay.
We have the power to shape it. Those anxieties are understandable.
Yeah, for sure.
But don't let fear paralyze you. Turn that energy into action.
So what can people do?
Get involved in these conversations. Explore these ideas. Demand solutions that are fair.
So it's about taking control.
Exactly. We're not just passengers. We're the drivers.
I love that, but that can feel overwhelming.
Yeah.
So where do you even start?
Start by asking questions.
Okay, like what?
If you were designing a system for a fair and equitable future, what would you prioritize? What trade-offs would you make?
Those are big questions.
They are, and there's no one right answer.
Right, this is complex.
Very.
But the important thing is to engage in the dialogue.
Absolutely. That's where the real power lies.
I completely agree.
Good.
Well, on that note, I think we've reached the end of our deep dive.
Sounds good.
We've explored the productivity dividend, tackled the challenges, and even peeked into some even bolder UBI ideas. Hopefully you're leaving today not just informed, but empowered, knowing you have a role to play in shaping the future of work.
That's the goal.
Thanks for joining us.
You bet.
Until next time, keep diving deep, keep asking questions, and keep pushing the boundaries of what's possible. See you next time. Bye!
Yeah, that's where things get really interesting.
Okay, I'm all ears.
So, our second source,
The Challenges and Solutions paper.
yeah, that one really dives into some fascinating possibilities.
Okay.
It kind of acknowledges that, the productivity dividend alone might not be a magic bullet.
Especially as AI gets, more and more sophisticated.
Exactly. So it starts looking at a bunch of other capitalist-oriented universal basic income models.
Okay, UBI.
Yeah. But not just your typical everyone gets a check kind of UBI.
Right. More tailored to the whole AI thing.
Exactly. More nuanced,
Okay, so give me an example.
All right. So one idea is what they call public resource dividends.
Public resource dividends. Okay.
So think about all the profits that come from things like, natural resources or intellectual property.
Okay.
Instead of those profits going just to companies or governments,
Right.
they could use some of that to create a basic income for everyone.
So it's kind of like acknowledging that everyone deserves a share.
Exactly. Yeah, it's a different way of looking at it.
That's fascinating. What else?
Another idea is automation royalties.
Automation royalties.
So picture this. Companies have to pay a kind of tax
Okay. What?
based on how much their automation efforts are, boosting their productivity.
Right.
And then those royalties get used to fund a basic income for everybody.
So it's like connecting the benefits of automation directly to society.
Exactly. Yeah. Make sure everyone benefits, not just the companies.
But wouldn't that discourage companies from automating in the first place?
It's a good question.
Right.
I mean, it's a balancing act, right?
For sure.
You want to encourage progress, but also make sure it's fair.
Right.
Again, these are just frameworks. The details would need a lot of thought.
Of course, to avoid unintended consequences and all that.
Exactly.
So what other models did they highlight?
Okay, well, one that really caught my eye is this idea of innovation bonds.
Innovation bonds. Okay.
Yeah, so it's kind of like treating UBI as an investment in the future. Like, governments could issue bonds that are specifically tied to, the expected gains from new tech.
Okay.
And then as those innovations actually, boost the economy, the returns on those bonds would go towards funding the basic income.
So we're betting on human ingenuity.
Yeah, exactly. And everyone gets a piece of the pie.
That's a pretty optimistic outlook.
It is. It's kind of reframing UBI as something positive,
Right, not a handout, but an investment.
Exactly. But of course, it relies on, innovation actually leading to growth.
Right, and there's no guarantee of that.
Nope, definitely not.
But I do like that idea of connecting well-being to innovation.
Yeah, it's proactive.
Right, not just reacting to job losses, but preparing for the future.
Exactly.
Okay, but let's get practical for a minute.
Sure.
How would you actually distribute this basic income, cash, or are there other options?
Well, the paper talks about some alternatives to just direct cash payments.
Okay, like what?
One idea is market-driven vouchers.
Market-driven vouchers.
Okay. So instead of just giving people cash, the UBI could be distributed as vouchers that are good for, specific goods and services.
So targeted spending.
Exactly.
Okay.
It could help stimulate specific sectors like education or healthcare.
Right, and still meet people's needs.
Exactly.
So it's getting more and more specific, moving away from that one-size-fits-all approach.
Right.
Are there any models that take it even further?
There's one that's really out there. It's called shared equity in AI enterprises.
Shared equity. Okay.
So instead of just getting dividends, people would actually get ownership in the AI systems that replace them.
Wow, that's a big one.
Yeah, it's about literally sharing ownership in the means of production.
How would that even work? I mean,
Yeah, the details get pretty tricky, and the paper doesn't really dive into specifics.
okay.
It's more about presenting a range of possibilities.
Right, pushing the boundaries.
Yeah, we got to challenge those assumptions about work and ownership.
Yeah, because things are changing so fast.
They really are.
Okay, so we've got this whole buffet of UBI models,
Mm-hmm.
but we started with the productivity dividend.
Right.
Where does that fit into this whole picture?
I kind of see it as a starting point, you know,
Okay.
a way to address those immediate job losses while we figure out these bigger long-term solutions.
Like a bridge to the future.
Yeah, you could say that.
That makes sense.
Yeah. Productivity dividend tackles individual jobs while these other models are about society as a whole.
So it's like a two-pronged approach.
Exactly.
Yeah,
Yeah. Dealing with the immediate impacts and then the bigger picture.
that's a really helpful way to think about it.
Good.
Yeah, it really does feel like we're at this crossroads, you know.
Hmm.
The decisions we make now about AI and work are going to have huge ripple effects.
No doubt.
It's a lot to wrap your head around,
Yeah, it is.
but, you know, it's easy to get lost in all the theory.
Right.
So let's try to make this a little more concrete
Okay.
for the person listening to this right now. Maybe someone who's feeling a little anxious about their own job, you know, with all this talk about AI.
Mm-hmm.
What would you say to them?
Well, I'd say, first of all, those feelings are totally valid,
Right.
but the future isn't something that's just going to happen to us.
Okay.
We get to help shape it.
So what can people do?
I think the most important thing is to get involved.
Okay.
Don't just sit back and let things happen.
Right. Be proactive.
Exactly. Engage in these conversations, learn about these different ideas,
Mm.
and speak up to, demand solutions that are fair and equitable.
So it's about taking control.
Yeah, we're not just passengers in this ride.
I like that, but that can feel kind of daunting, you know?
Yeah, it can.
Where do you even begin?
Start by asking yourself some questions.
Okay.
Like, if you were designing a system to make sure everyone had a fair shot in this new world of AI, what would that look like?
Wow.
What would be your priorities? What trade-offs would you be willing to make?
Those are some really thought-provoking questions.
They are, and there's no easy answer.
Right? This is complex stuff.
Yeah, it is. But the important thing is to start thinking about it, to engage in that dialogue.
I think that's a great point.
Good.
Well, I think that about wraps up our deep dive for today.
Yeah.
We've covered a lot of ground,
Yeah.
you know, from the ins and outs of the productivity dividend
Right.
to the challenges and potential pitfalls, and even some pretty radical UBI ideas.
Yeah, we went there.
I hope everyone listening is walking away with not just a better understanding of these concepts,
That's the hope.
but also a sense of hope, you know, that we can actually create a future where everyone benefits from AI.
Yeah, that's the goal.
So thanks for joining us on this journey.
You bet.
Keep those questions coming, keep exploring, and keep pushing for a better future.
Absolutely.
Until next time, everyone.
See ya.